I knew the biggest challenge for any architecture practice is actually getting its first project. I actually took that money and I invested it in the S&P 500. Rental income means that I have to turn over far less in the architecture business than, let's say, a more traditional architecture practice would.
Hello, Architect Nation, and welcome back. Ryan Willard here, co-founding principal at Business of Architecture. As a practice owner, you're probably all too familiar with the challenges of balancing creative work with the demands of running a business. Have you ever found yourself questioning how to scale your business, expand your project portfolio, or develop a more lucrative income stream without burning out? Well, on today's episode, you're going to discover how one architect took a leap into the world of architect developer business models and the unconventional path that led to his success. The secrets to leveraging design creativity for maximum profit without compromising on your artistic vision, and why focusing on a unique, repeatable product could be the key to scaling your architectural practice while maintaining a sustainable income. In today's episode, I sit down with Peter Markos, an architect, developer, and founder of the Monocoque Cabin project, known for his innovative approach to tiny homes. Peter's entrepreneurial journey began at a young age with a passion for furniture making and timber structures, and he's since become a recognized expert in the field, securing funding from Airbnb to bring his unique holiday home concept to life. Attention architects, if you're building everyone else's dreams while yours collect dust, it's time for the Smart Practice Method Masterclass. This free masterclass is your blueprint for eliminating overwhelm and slaying chaos. Stop drawing up excuses. Start designing your ideal practice today. Go to smartpracticemethod.com to get access to this free video. Stay tuned. This episode is packed with actionable insights you won't want to miss. Peter, welcome to the Business of Architecture. How are you, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, Ryan.
Very excited to be talking with you, and I was very intrigued when I got your email to one of our responses about architect developer business models. You're an architect. You've got your own practice, and you're also the founder of it. Am I saying it right? The Monocoque Cabin.
Yeah. The
The Monocoque Cabin.
Sorry,
Which we'll
Monocoque. Monocoque Cabin.
Monocoque.
Yeah.
Monocoque. The Monocoque Cabin. Great. Okay, so which is a really interesting kind of architectural developer business model, which for once has a potential for a lot of scale involved in it. So perhaps we'll jump in and we'll talk a little bit about your Markos design workshop and how the two sort of businesses sit with each other. And let's start with, how did it all begin?
So it began. So I studied at Sheffield for my undergrad, and I did a year out in practice, pretty normal. And then I did a year working in India. But then part of that year, I went and lived with a friend in a place called Kashmir, and I started designing this chair, because Kashmir is very famous for its sort of crafts and its manufacturing. And I was kind of like taken by this idea of, like, as an architect, having your own product, particularly looking at the likes of Eames and Alto, because obviously with the Eames couple, they had their chairs, and then the same with Alto as well. So I was really just drawn by this idea of creating a product and developing a product, which would almost iterate over time. So I made the first prototype of the chair out in Kashmir, which was made from Kashmiri walnut. And that was just such an amazing experience, because I was getting the experience of designing something, commissioning it as a manufacturer, and then seeing that entire process through. And my experience in practice had been, you are quite limited to what it is you can engage in. And obviously, I know there are some very clear reasons why practices do that, but I think to some extent that can actually just limit your potential and perhaps limit the sort of avenue that might suit you better. So after that, I returned to the UK to do my part 2 at UCL, but I was really determined when I'd graduate that I would start my own practice, pretty much straight out of
Mhm.
graduation.
Ah, you're at the Bartlett?
At the Bartlett, yeah.
No.
You're at the Bartlett, weren't you?
I was, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, went studied at the Bartlett, um, which was great. And obviously during that time, it was at the time of COVID. And I think in my head, I was just formulating this idea, like, how am I going to start a business? I knew the biggest challenge for any architecture practice is actually getting its first project, particularly getting a decent project. Um, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on the show, but I came across a interview that Enoch, your co-founder, did with Jonathan Siegel.
Oh, yeah.
And I honestly must have listened to it about 10 or 15 times because um, Jonathan gets very granular of how a 20 something can do their first architecture.
His story is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's so inspiring. Him and Roger Solozovic, those two guys, their stories are really they're quite similar, but yeah, Stevens is remarkable.
I actually don't know Rogers. I'm going to give that one a listen because I actually gave Jonathan. Every time I listen to that interview, I get nuggets out of that, and I get more. Is it like it's only half an hour long, but he goes into these ideas and things that I'd never really thought about or considered, like this idea of sweat equity, which is essentially this idea that you essentially have your day job where you're getting paid for it. And then outside of that day job, you spend time working on your development. And those drawings, those models you prepare, they become the projects, the sweat equity. So I found that idea quite captivating. I was also sort of quite keen to protect the downside, I guess. And I was reading about, developers going bankrupt and some of the risks around that. So I wanted to start with something pretty small, but I also didn't want to just, let's say buy a house and flip it because that wouldn't necessarily encapsulate much of my design interest. So I sort of landed on this idea of creating a holiday let and creating a cabin, because I think one of the good things about doing a holiday let and a cabin is, or a tiny home, let's say, is the more unique the design is, the more out there the design is, the more interesting the design is, the higher the rental yield, the higher the occupancy rate. So in that sense, it actually pays to be creative, which in my view can actually be quite difficult to achieve in architecture because in architecture, typically if you're designing an extension to a house, you know, those sorts of ideas of having a really creative structure might not be the most appealing thing for the client because at the end of the day, they might want to sell the building or, you know, so so yeah, I was really taken by this idea of creating a holiday let, and obviously this was during COVID, so so there was a massive demand for local holidays as well because people could travel. And then when I graduated, I was like, right, okay, let's sort of get this started. And to be honest, I didn't really, from the day we started, I didn't really have many of the prerequisite skills or tools that you'd need to develop a project. So I didn't own any land. My family didn't own any land. I didn't even some of the more basic things. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a driving license. So, and most of the ideal sites would be places which are rurally located. Um, I didn't know many contractors, any engineers, etc. But what I was quite keen to do was to actually just really create a list of things and just work my way through that to say, right, okay, how are we going to acquire the site? And then I landed on this idea of doing a lease, which essentially revolved around this idea that I would approach a farm or farmers and say, look, can we lease a plot for your land in return for a profit share? Um, and a profit share of the rental income of the cabin. And this actually, because I went to a school where there were lots of families who had farms and etc. Um, I was able to sort of reach those contacts, and they were able to sort of send me into the right direction to farmers who may be interested in this. And there was quite a high uptake. There was a lot of interest. I think looking back, one of the reasons it had a lot of interest is because what we were looking for was a really small plot of land, like a quarter of an acre, if not smaller than that. And I worked out that per year that would only yield a farm in terms of profits about 50 to £100 if it was a dairy farm. So um, like a holiday let, which has the potential to, yield the farm somewhere between 2,000 to £6,000, is very appealing. And also it has the potential to improve the value of the land, amongst other things. Uh, so there was one farm in particular who had a really beautiful plot and just seemed like a really easy guy to get on with. So I didn't know him personally, but we sort of entered a lease option, a lease on the back of that. Um, and then, and then I think one thing to mention as well, which was one of the things I learned from studying at UCL, was that you can really speak through the work you do,
Mhm.
particularly because I didn't have much experience actually delivering a project or building any projects or anything really. So what I started to do, you can actually see it in the background, is I made these 1 to 20 models, which were 3D printed off the cabin. And that's how I sort of convinced the farmers that I approached. So I approached them with beautiful visuals, physical model. I was basically able to say, it's going to be a bit like this, just 25 times bigger. Um, and and also because I think also, whereas if you study architecture, you're at the bar level or whatever, you are exposed a lot to 3D printed models. But if you're a rural farm, it's actually probably not something you come across a lot. So that gave me a lot of credibility, and no one really questioned it.
Mhm.
But that actually also expanded to when I wanted to start to build out the team, like the structural engineers. We actually got Price and Myers involved, who are a really credible engineering firm, and then Block Build, who again are a really credible manufacturing company. I thought that would be a really effective way of actually building my own credibility as well as just building a really strong collaboration team. So that actually worked really, really well. Um, so yeah, yeah.
Amazing. That is brilliant. And so, what was the next steps then? You got the kind of team together. How did you fund the first cabin? Or
Yeah. So again, at this point, I was basically just working off sweat equity and my savings.
Mhm.
So in terms of paying the engineers, I would just pay them out of my savings.
Mhm.
They were fairly small amounts at those times. Um, and then one thing I started doing as well is um, every sort of visual, every model, I'd start to publish it on Instagram, partly as a diary to the project, but also just a way of just saying, "Oh, look, this is what's going on. This is what I'm up to." And I think sometimes social media gets quite a negative view, but for me, two things happened. The first thing was a lot of people were very supportive,
Mhm.
but the other thing was about you know, maybe a year and a half into this process, maybe a bit longer. Um, some people started reaching out, some friends started saying, "Oh, look, Airbnb are doing this competition." And the competition was they were giving 100 people $100,000 to build their unique property. And at first, like a couple of people sent it to me, I sort of ignored it. I didn't think much of it, and then more and more people started sending it to me, saying, "Look, this really fits what you're doing." Um, so I applied to that competition. I know there was something like 250,000 people who applied to it, and there were 3 stages, and I just started getting whittled down for it. And again, I think because you had to obviously upload like drawings, models, etc. The fact that I'd, let's say, gone above and beyond with these models and these drawings, that meant that we had a pretty decent chance of winning the competition, even though something like 250,000 people applied for it. I mean, I remember what a planning officer say, like when I submitted this for planning, was like, why have you done so much work? Because from a commercial point of view, it probably didn't make sense. The the model, let's say, if you were some of the models, if you were to sell them, or to charge a client, you're looking at about £3,000 to £6,000. So commercially, it didn't make sense, I guess at first, but it did actually make sense in that way. So we won the money and we won the funding, um, and that what obviously $100,000 was a lot of money. But the next thing I did, which I don't think is definitely not something I'd recommend doing, and it was luck, to be honest, but I actually took that money and I invested it in the S&P 500 at a time.
Oh, this is genius.
Yeah. So this was October 23. If you look at a graph at the of the S&P 500, it was at a very low point. Uh, so I invested it then, and then within a year got a return of about 40% or something. Like I said, this was
Was it just
risky.
an index fund or like
It was an ETF, actually.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it's funny enough because I was talking to a friend about, because he's thinking about doing something similar. And I was like, I really wouldn't recommend it, but it did work out for the better.
Oh, Peter, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. So you put the money aside for a year basically in an ETF. It went up 40%, and then you pulled it out and then you used it.
That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then at that point, we'd got the planning permission. We were ready to start on the construction. I just kind of took the money out and started. In I think I think the thing to say as well at this stage, I wasn't even qualified. So I hadn't qualified as an architect. But I think my thought had always been I'd have to take out some kind of bank loan to fund this, or um, I didn't really know what. But one of the good things about the money from Airbnb was it did actually make the whole thing seem less stressful, because
Yeah.
it's it's not a conventional building. There's lots. It's all curves. It was new for the manufacturing company. It was obviously totally new for me. It was the first time I'd ever delivered a building. It's all made from shingles. It's all made from plywood. It's all off.
The name monocoque, I'm assuming, is from like chassis construction type of.
Exactly. I mean, I can quickly show you the shape if you want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Please.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a. So this is. So we've got these. We use the models a lot for prototypes, but this is actually the original design.
Right.
The one in the background just there is the newer version. So, but like I said, this even as a form
Right.
was very difficult to deliver. Um,
So like it's a CLT kind of timber construction, and then insulated, and then you got your shingles on the outside, and
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So exactly, so it's all plywood insulated, and then the shingles on the outside. So yeah, so at this point, so just before we went on site, I at that point became qualified, and then financially, it actually made sense to leave the practice I was working on, and then just go and work on this almost as a subcontractor and a main contractor. Um, because because it was becoming a bit much actually just working in practice. And like I said, financially, the day rate of a lot of contractors would be a lot higher than what I was earning in practice.
so the math ain't mathing with your. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Uh, so yeah, I sort of teamed up with a carpenter, and then actually I got one of my friends involved as well in terms of doing the building work. Um, and then and then obviously that all started moving along. I do want to say though, a lot of this wasn't. I know a lot of this sounds like a lot of like luck and chance, and there was a lot of that.
You're an entrepreneur, Peter.
Yeah.
You're making your luck. I mean, just the aptitude to take the risk of sticking in the S&P 500 as a stroke is a stroke of genius. I love it. I love it. The whole thing is is making my hair stand a minute. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. But at that point, my luck started to run a bit dry, to be honest. And so, some bad stuff started going. So the first thing is it took a lot longer than we would have wanted to. And that was just, to be honest, it's probably down to a bit of bad project management on my end. And then finally, when we did get it finished, the weekend we got it finished, somebody came along, stole all the solar panels, the generator, and it was this time last year. So it was the point in which it was like perfect to rent out in summer.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so we had about £20,000 worth of stuff stolen. It was insured. So we, but and then we were quite conscious that if we were to just reinstate the off-grid electrics, that would get stolen again. So we had to connect to the grid, and that entire process took like 6 months or so. So I've got to be honest, that was quite a challenging time. I remember actually just waking up middle of the night and stuff, panicking because for some time it was unclear even if we could connect it to the grid. And then at that point, I was like, well, how's this going to even operate at all? But obviously, thankfully, we like November last year, we did get it up and running. And then we sort of started renting it out. And then along about that time as well. So once the construction of this finished, I then started taking on private clients. And then actually just entering this niche of holiday lets and unique homes. Um, and actually quite quickly been able to establish myself in that niche. And I think one of the things about doing a development is you can actually say to prospective clients, look, I know what it's like. I know some of the financial challenges, and you're actually putting your money where your mouth is. I guess in many ways, if I'd be similar to you guys as podcast hosters of a business of architecture, guess what gives you credibility in a sense is the fact that you've got that experience as an architect and, running your own business. Um, so then I started winning work. Some of the projects more sort of conventional, back extensions, home remodeling. But I think more recently, the projects are getting much more interesting and much more in line with my niche, and people sort of outreaching me, not the other way around. So not sure if I've missed anything there.
And that was it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant story of getting the cabin up and constructed. So is it now up and running? You're letting it out, and it's kind of bringing in cash flow and starting to pay for itself.
Yeah.
And
So
and
go
that
ahead.
business model, you proved it. You're happy with it as a proof of concept that it works.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been renting it for about 6 months. When we started renting it, there were so many challenges to the extent that I was almost regretting it as a business model. Um, because I would actually dread a guest checking in because there would always be something wrong or something not quite right. But I've been working really closely with it's not really a cleaner, it's more like a house manager, a lady called Jackie. And she's been absolutely brilliant. And she managing it, and she sort of manages when we get bookings, she sort of organizes her team of cleaners so they deal with changeovers. And what I've found over the last 6 months is those problems, obviously through a lot of effort, but those problems have just gradually started diminishing.
Mhm.
But I think the other thing which has been really interesting is that acts as almost like a post-occupancy evaluation, because that, in terms of the REBA stages, post-occupancy is often ignored or not really considered. Or
What kind of relationship then do you now have with the farmer who owns the land that the property is sitting on, and what risks are there? Like, 'cause, and I'm assuming you've got a kind of bespoke contract in place where you're leasing out. He can't suddenly say, right, you're not allowed to have this thing here anymore, and change his mind. I want it back for the cows. How have you sort of navigated that, and what was the process for getting the agreement in place?
Yeah, that was actually I completely missed that out, but that was really challenging. I think that was because it was the first thing I've done, so it's kind of moved away from it. So we typically, the landowner writes a lease agreement, but
Mhm,
because I was approaching them with the project, we I like we my solicitors wrote the lease agreement.
mhm.
So it's got the period's got the lease has got like a period of 7 years, but we've got
Right.
something known as like the right to renew, um, which basically means that we've got the right to renew the agreement, and that is subject to what's already in place. So because what you wouldn't want is to approach the landowner is to for the landowner to say, "Oh yeah, but I want an increase in rent from like 20% to 50%," and they would essentially have you over a barrel.
Yeah.
So that's what the right to renew protects.
Mhm.
Of something I'll get onto a bit later, but I've got a non-executive director who's joining my business. Uh, he's very knowledgeable and capable, but he's recommending that we do something called a lease option in future. Um, and the idea of a lease option is it actually allows you to buy the land at an agreed price, um, which would essentially give the business more of like a greater valuation. So at the moment, the valuation is almost the lease and the length of the lease and the right to renew. But if you've got a lease option and you can buy the land outright, then you've actually just got a property in its own land.
Mhm. And so is that an option then that you'd want to be able to buy the property outright and then just have it and then it's protected?
Uh,
Or
I think
or does it not make any sense?
yeah, I think from a business sense it does. Because I think one of the things with a business like this is you've got the rental income which comes every every few days, every day or so even. Um, but the real valuation is actually when you come to sell the business, because most people don't want to spend time, you know, using their sweat equity, risking things on the S&P 500, and just going through this process. And you get lots of private equity, lots of affluent individuals and affluent companies who will want to buy out something like this as a whole business. So that's just a long-winded way of saying the lease option would give us a better balance sheet, and therefore it would mean we'd have a higher valuation, and thus we can, in theory, sell it for a higher amount.
Amazing. Brilliant. Very, very, very smart. It's not too dissimilar to the kind of service department strategies that you hear a lot of property guys talking about, where they might approach somebody who's already, a landlord, and they'll say, "Hey, you've thought about putting your property up on Airbnb for rental. We'll manage it. We'll do it. We'll even do whatever internal changes are needed to the apartment, and then we'll take it from there." And it's almost like they're subletting it now for that kind of purpose. And people do that. They build businesses out of approaching landlords to take their properties and then use it for an Airbnb purposes.
Yeah, that's very. Is that rent to rent? Is it?
Rent to rent, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think ultimately, because I was sort of watching something on rent to rent the other day, and I think it's good that people are doing that, because you do just need to work with what you've got, because
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, when I actually started this, I had none of the things required to develop a project. The only thing really you could probably point to is the fact, not the only thing, it's a massive thing, but was that I was an architect. But ultimately, there are people sitting with lots of land, and farmers are, typically speaking, they're land rich, but cash poor. So, um, and I know other people in the industry and other people who've got similar business models what I've done, and there is absolutely no shortage of farmers who are interested in having one of these cabins on
Was
their
it,
land.
was it difficult then getting planning permission to have some sort of residence on farmland?
Yes and no. So the no is because it's a commercial. So it's not residence; it's a commercial property. Uh,
Right. Okay.
so I can like go and live there, let's say, and there's lots of stipulations in the planning which would prevent me from doing that,
Hmm.
or anybody else. But then at the same time, we had lots of objections from neighbours, because I think in rural areas, people are often worried about this fear that the land is just going to be, or the farm or whatever is just going to be converted to like a caravan park. And that, so we had something like 28 objections, which is pretty crazy for a small cabin. Um, uh, so
Yeah.
that yeah, so like I said, I think we actually thought from a planning perspective and from a regulation perspective, I thought, oh, well, this is going to sail through, but it obviously took a bit longer because of that process.
Hmm. Amazing. So tell us a little bit then about what your plans are for scaling the cabin idea. Do you want to take it to more farmers? Is that is it a repeatable business model, or has it opened up the pathway to do something else? How would you scale it? What would funding look like to do something like this?
So if obviously I started looking at like the Eames couple and Alto, and they both developed this idea of a product, and a product which can scale. Alto particularly did this on with a number of products actually. Um, and I think one of the things which was quite nice in their business model is that actually opened them up a load of creativity, because they were able to develop a cash flow from these products, which meant that they weren't too reliant on doing like projects which were a bad fit or they weren't that interested in. So I was looking about, okay, how can I sort of develop this? We've already developed this as a product. It's got the potential to scale, and I think maybe one of the problems with uh, the architect developer model to some extent is you develop one project and then you go and develop another one. And every time you're developing another one, you're essentially starting the CAD drawings, you're starting everything from afresh. Obviously, you're far more knowledgeable as an architect and as a developer in what you're doing. But ultimately, you are also starting again. So it's difficult, I guess, to scale. Um, so I've been really interested in how I kind of scale this. So what I've been doing is just spending the last year or so just working on developing the next version of the cabin. So between, like, let's say a project goes quiet, or we're waiting to hear back from the planning department on something, or anything else, I would use that free time to work on the project. But I think what's been quite nice is, rather than that actually being sweat equity, I'm technically getting paid for that because of the money coming in from the rental income.
Mhm.
So the rental income means that I have to turn over far less in the architecture business than, let's say, a more traditional architecture
Yeah.
practice would. So that's been really good. Um, and then I actually put something out on LinkedIn maybe in February or so. At this stage, I've got an angel investor involved who's going to come on as a non-executive director. And the idea is he's going to fund the next 3 or 4 cabins. Um, and and yeah, so we're going to do the next 3 or 4, and then from that as well, we're going to say, right, okay, what can we learn from this, and then iterate the business accordingly.
Love it. I love it. Very smart. Very, very. Congratulations.
No, cheers for that. Really appreciate it.
Really, really inspiring story of what I love about it, as you kind of outlined, is that you you did this without a lot of resource except for your intellect and your skills. Right, there was there wasn't an enormous amount of capital that you had that you were able just to go and play with. It was thoughtful, and and had the kind of aptitude to be able to take some risks, and then whatever you needed to do in terms of lowering your kind of operational costs and just being sort of streamlined to make it happen. That is, yeah, it's brilliant. This is how good businesses get started.
No, absolutely. I mean, to be honest, it does sometimes bother me a little bit when I hear people saying, "Oh, they can't start something because they've not got the resources," because that's really not how it works.
Hmm.
Even with the podcast and the business consultancy you guys offer, like I'm sure when you started, the resources that you had were far worse than what you've got now. You know.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting. Enoch and I, we often talk about, our initial setup cost us, under 100 quid. And I was using the same setup for up until not too, probably way longer than I should have been. Um, but it was like, yeah, you start, and particularly now we're entering into this really interesting world of the digital economy. And there are so many unique opportunities that are that have got such a lower level entry to barrier for us to be able to play with, that, yeah, a bit of architectural thought being applied laterally, or just take a sidestep out of the traditional structure, can really open up a very exciting new kinds of business models.
Uh,
Talk.
yeah, just on that, I mean, just to say as well, because I mean, I started all of this back end of 2021, maybe
Right.
2022. And that was before things like ChatGPT and the way that AI is just like, you've got a contract or you need advice on a contract or a bit of a second opinion, the way that can actually just feed into your business. I literally sometimes just kind of walk around the office with the Chat GPT talking, just ask it questions, almost like a business advisor. But I think these tools are just improving. It really is getting so much easier to start a business. And like you're saying as well, there's so many ways to. I mean, I've got a friend who makes like a really good income from doing videos on sharks on YouTube, and that world was just like not a thing,
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago. So
No,
yeah.
it's amazing. I've been at kind of entrepreneurial meets before and bumped into kids, like I'm talking 14, 15, 16-year-olds who have got online businesses selling Nike trainers and are bringing in more than most architects are. And it's kind of really, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. I've got a client actually, and her son is uh he's a tinkerer, and he's good with calculators, and he's been buying like secondhand kind of scientific calculators off eBay that are broken, fixes them, and then resells them. And I was like, well, this is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
A fantastic little kind of businesses that are also allowing people to dive deep into to specific kind of domains of knowledge. And we're in this kind of world now where you can go deep into very unique domains of knowledge, and you can mix it up with another very unique domain of knowledge, and then something very exciting can happen. In terms of Markos Design Workshop, the kind of more traditional part of the architectural practice, how do you see that evolving, and what's its role right now?
So yeah, so I really like both businesses, to be honest. So with the cabin, it's a service accommodation essentially, and it like every day, every couple of days or so, we'll get a small amount of money which comes in. Obviously, with the architecture work, they tend to be bigger fees. I quite like the doing. I quite like being an architect. So for me, I'm not really motivated by the idea of like a 4-hour work week or anything like that. I actually quite like just spending time working. So the idea that you're trading time for money in a traditional architecture practice, for me, is not necessarily an issue. I guess what can be an issue with an architecture practice is if you've got like high overheads and you're relying on projects and turning over projects and doing projects you don't necessarily want to be doing, that's maybe where things get a bit negative. So I quite like this setup at the moment. And like I said, I think on the back of doing this project, 'cause it's got like a lot of publication. It was in like Dezeen. It was one of the most popular articles in the AJ, parametric architecture, you know, I think maybe even the Architect's Review, like lots of the big magazines, um, Design Boom, stuff like that. So, on the back of a lot of that, I've started to get into this niche of unique holiday homes and actually helping people develop their holiday home business. And a lot of that business comes through the things like blogging, a little bit through LinkedIn, a little bit through Instagram. But that's actually something I'm trying to work on and develop at the moment, is actually my marketing skills and sales, because that's certainly something I think is a massive skill, and it's something I want to get a lot better at.
Brilliant. Amazing. So I'm going to give you an invitation to come back onto the Business of Architecture podcast in, I don't know, whether next 6 months or year or so, when the monocoque cabin has been put into kind of scaled production. I would love to hear how this develops and unfolds, and just want to say massive thank you for responding to the podcast and sharing your brilliant story with us. Really, really inspiring.
No, that's very kind, and thanks for having me. I've honestly got so much from listening to the show, and I think it's such a good thing and just such a great addition to the industry as well. So thanks for having me.
Pleasure. And here's today's smart practice tool tip. Remember when you became an architect to actually architect things? Instead, you've joined thousands of firm owners trapped in admin hell, where spreadsheets multiply and your design passion slowly dies. The Delegation Roadmap Smart Practice tool gives you a proven system to identify which tasks are stealing $150,000 plus of your time annually and how to get them off your plate for good. Your family misses you, your creativity is gathering dust, and your firm is waiting for you to lead it properly. Get this tool 100% free by going to www.businessofarchitecture.com/delegate. And thank you to our recent listeners who left reviews for the podcast on iTunes. Your reviews help others find this podcast, so this rising tide raises all boats. To be acknowledged on this show, open up the podcast app on your iPhone, search for the Business of Architecture, and after clicking on the show, scroll all the way to the bottom and leave a review. Today's episode of the Business of Architecture show is sponsored by Smart Practice TM, the world's leading step-by-step solution for small architectural practice owners that want to structure their existing practice so the complexity of business doesn't get in the way of the architecture. Because you see, it likely isn't your architecture skills that hold you back. It's the business aspects of running a practice, managing projects and people, dealing with clients, contractors, and money. So if you're ready to quit being a glorified administrator and get back to architecture again, go to smartpracticemethod.com to discover the proven, simple, and easy to implement smart practice method that is revolutionizing firm management for owners and teams. Hey, Ryan Willard here, and I want to thank you for joining us today and remind you that the views expressed on this show by our guests do not represent those of the host, and we make no representation, promise, guarantee, pledge, warranty, contract, bond, or commitment except to help you conquer the world. Carpe diem.